Hello, everybody out there in radio land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Only here at 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. If you're new, maybe you're a new student, welcome freshman, all that. This is Wider's, or at least a show that Wider allows me to host, your host, Andy Argo, where I talk about what is going on from a working class perspective. We break down mainstream narrative media and basically call out the BS on those in power. Coming up on the show, we got a lot to talk about. Pretty jam-packed today. We've got some pretty interesting interviews coming up. Coming up at 1 o'clock, we are going to be joined by a candidate for U of M Regent who is alleging some malfeasance at the Michigan Democratic Party convention that happened a couple weeks ago. And then we're also going to be joined by Jeremy Kronk, who recently resigned from Harper Creek High School as a science teacher because they wanted him to take down a flag with quote unquote partisan messaging like science is real and you should respect women and Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. So that's all coming up. Lawrence is going to be joining me here in a few minutes, and we're going to break down some important local and national stories. I think today, because often, this show is sometimes can come off as a little bit cynical. We're always criticizing capitalism and the status quo and stuff. So let's start with a little bit of good news. Let's talk a little bit about how our city is maybe moving towards that sort of social safety net that should just be that should be the status quo. The kind of thing that I'm about to talk about here, which should really just be what they do across the country, which is there is a new program for expectant mothers that could be offering them up to $7,500 to prepare for the expenses of having a child. Headline, this comes to us from Bridge, Michigan. Kalamazoo moms can apply to get $7,500 next year. Detroiters could be next. This was written by Nusrat Rahman. It was published on September 3rd. A program that provides cash payments to expectant mothers and families with babies is slated to launch next year in Kalamazoo as part of a statewide expansion to help eliminate infant poverty. RX Kids, which started in Flint earlier this year and is regarded by officials as a first of its kind initiative in the country, gives moms $1,500 mid pregnancy for essentials like food, prenatal care, cribs, or other needs. Then, after birth, families get $500 a month for the first year of the infant's life, adding up to $7,500 in total. The program received $20 million in a recent state budget allocation to allow it to grow beyond Flint to communities across Michigan. The program is designed to help 840 babies, covering the more than 800 expected to be born in 2025 Kalamazoo. It's the city's first cash prescription program for expecting mothers and babies, according to a news release. During a news conference at Kalamazoo City Hall, Dr. Mona Hanna, director of RX Kids and associate dean of public health at the Michigan State University College of Human Medicine, applauded the upcoming program expansion and the state's contribution. From Flint to Kalamazoo to the Upper Peninsula to Southeast Michigan, RX Kids is spreading, and we are redefining how we should proactively and collectively care for our children, Hannah said. RX Kids seeks philanthropic matches to support the program across the state, which would open it up to people regardless of their income. As a quick aside, I think instead of appealing to the generosity of billionaires, we should tax them instead. But that's a quick, just a quick little aside to get back to the article. That way billionaires don't have leverage. It's just something that's expected of them as a tax-paying citizen. Anyway, Hannah, a pediatrician who gained national fame after she spotted high lead levels among children in Flint and was among the key people who exposed the water crisis, Said moms in Flint who participate in the RX Kids program spend their cash payments on baby supplies, food, rent, utilities, and transportation. Diapers, childcare, and out of pocket medical expenses contribute to the cost of raising children. Income plunges right before babies are born, Hannah said. Moms often have to come out of the workforce in poverty as its highest spot in the life course at childbirth. Can you imagine? Families are poorest right when the baby is about to be born, and that dip in income persists until the whole first year of life. The 5 year Kalamazoo RX Kids program received $5 million from the Stryker Johnson Foundation, $500,000 from the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, and contributions from the United Way of South Central Michigan and the Bronson Health Foundation. We know that every growing family and every baby can benefit from extra support during pregnancy in the first year of life, said Alyssa Stewart, Chief Impact Officer at the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. A survey conducted in May by the nonprofit YWCA Kalamazoo of 102 pregnant people found that about half reported an anticipated increase in expenses once their baby was born, and 74% reported little to no confidence in their budget after their child was born, according to Jamaica Patrick Singleton, Executive Director of Cradle Kalamazoo, a coalition working to reduce infant death and Vice President of Community Health for YWCA Kalamazoo. Participants said extra money from a program like RX Kids would help moms to be pay off debt, save money, keep up with housing costs, and cover childcare. It would reduce stress, they said, and allow families to enjoy time with their new baby without worrying about finances. Families will have the ability to immediately access funding that can make the difference in how they feed their children, afford medication, secure safe housing, and obtain access to many other helpful resources. We know that reducing infant mortality is not a quick overnight task, but helpful tools like Kalamazoo RX Kids will definitely help us get closer to achieving our goal, Patrick Singleton said. About 22% of children under the age of 5 in the city of Kalamazoo live below the poverty line, according to 2022 census estimates. 53% of households in 2022 fell below the United Way's ALICE threshold, which includes people living in poverty and families earning more than the federal poverty level, but who still don't make enough to afford the basics where they reside. Toward the end of the year, Kalamazoo families can fill out a form to express interest in the Kalamazoo RX Kids program before the program is slated to go live in January. For more information on that, especially if you are thinking about cooking up some little ones or you are in the process of it, go to rxkids.org. With state funding, Kids could expand into Wayne County cities too, including parts of Detroit, River Rouge, Highland Park, Melvindale, Ecorse, and Romulus, and the eastern Upper Peninsula, according to Hannah. There is interest in parts of Oakland County like Pontiac and Royal Oak Township as well, she said. We are working hand in hand with many communities. The number one effort right now is leveraging the private dollars to be able to match the public dollars to be able to launch the program. But you will see this throughout the geographic and demographic diversity of the state next year, Hannah said. In Flint, where nearly 78% of children under 5 live in poverty, RX Kids has so far distributed more than $2.7 million in cash to nearly 1,000 families since launching in January. More than half of the applicants make below $10,000 a year, and 4% earn more than $50,000 a year. There's evidence that cash benefits for children can lift them out of poverty. The pandemic era expanded child tax credit, which provided $250 to $300 per month for each eligible child, reached more than 61 million children and cut child poverty in half in 2021, compared with the year before, according to Columbia University Center on Poverty and Social Policy. After the benefits ended, child poverty rose sharply in 2022. January of that year saw 3.7 million more kids in poverty compared with December 2021. So if you want to read that article for yourself, that is on Bridge, Michigan. The headline: Kalamazoo moms can apply to get $7,500 next year. Detroiters could be next. And I do have to say, programs like this are really, this is the direction our country needs to head as far as providing a real more robust social safety net for our citizens. Circling back to an earlier point, I did want to explain out a little bit more. Um, from my perspective, a tax would be better than philanthropy. We could do a whole Marxist breakdown on philanthropy, but the quick and dirty is that by relying on philanthropy, we're basically at the behest of the whims of the ruling class. They can dole out money as they see fit, and it also provides them with a tremendous amount of leverage. This has been historically my biggest critique of the Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence. If there came a day where, say, maybe some leftists got elected to the city commission, or some programs were put forward that the ruling class did not like, well, they control the purse strings. They can stop funding the city budget. Effectively, that's how the Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence was created. There was talk about a progressive income tax, and they more or less said, hey, if you tax us, we're going to do some capital flight. That's when capitalists threatened to remove their businesses and industries from a locality or whatnot. And that's how they apply pressure on municipalities to have a more corporate friendly agenda. In any case, this is something that I think we need to see deployed across the state. It is a good sign, and it is good news for any expectant mothers out there in the Kalamazoo area. We're going to take a quick little break. We come back. We got some more local stories to hit on here on Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR, or online at widerfm.org. You can also find us online on YouTube, as well as our Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast that you can find on most podcasting apps. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution. Hello, everyone. We are back. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR, or online at widerfm.org. I'm your host, Andy Argo. We've got a lot more news to talk about this next one. We got a couple more Kalamazoo-based stories. And this intersects a lot with the upcoming election and extremism and whatnot. But this is another article from Bridge, Michigan, talking about a local kind of homegrown election denier who is in a position of power in an the upcoming election here in Kalamazoo County. Not just for folks who are new to the show and try to understand a little bit where we're coming from. Um, Traditionally, I have not supported Republicans or Democrats. I'm personally a socialist, and I think the politics of that bleeds through a lot if you listen to the show longer than 10 minutes. But at the same time, we've been very critical, and we've aired a lot of stories about kind of election denial. And I think it's a very important issue to talk about for several reasons. Because you know, no, U.S. is not a particularly good democracy. One could argue it's not even really a democracy to begin with. It's a plutocracy. It's a system run by the rich. We're kind of given the illusion of choice every 4 years. Sometimes you have a little bit more autonomy at the local level to actually decide who's going to manage your affairs. But at the same time, what we especially saw in 2020 is I think most Americans have an innate instinctual understanding that American democracy is kind of a joke. I think we're ranked something like 44 or 45th in the list of like democracies worldwide. And most of that is, of course, because of the influence of money in politics. We saw this play out in several primaries where, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, both two of the most decent people in U.S. politics. There's maybe a handful of them with progressive policies. Were both knocked out by money from APAC. Uh, and also just the way that, again, on both sides, primaries are we're going to talk to somebody at 1 o'clock who had some shenanigans happen to them as a candidate at the Michigan Democratic Party convention. Those of us who are a little older remember what happened to Bernie Sanders and his movement, effectively railroaded from the start, especially from, if you read the WikiLeaks leaks. But uh, what Trump's campaign did in 2020 was really kind of muddy the waters and take the instinctual uh, frustration at the lack of American democracy and funnel it through this kind of right wing dog whistle prism, which again they do it with a lot of their other politics. Again, if the correct answer to who is the enemy is the capitalist, the ruling class. But it's if you are a capitalist like Donald Trump and many of those other politicians, you're going to want to point the finger at immigrants. You're going to want to point the finger at the LGBTQ community, at cosmopolitan liberals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So part of that whole strategy by saying that the Donald Trump was cheated out of the last election based on zero evidence is to take that innate understanding and frustration that American democracy is rigged. By instead of saying American democracy is rigged by the ruling class, you could say it's rigged by this particular section of the ruling class that has rainbow bumper stickers on their car. And also funnels a lot of that energy towards some suspiciously, diverse places like Detroit. So all of that being said, let me tell you what's going on here in Kalamazoo. This is an article from Bridge, Michigan. It's written by Haley Harding from VoteBeat, published on September 5th. The American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan is suing a member of the Kalamazoo County Board of Canvassers, hoping a judge will declare that the man must certify the November election results, after a newspaper reported him saying that he might not. The suit is part of a growing legal effort around the country to ensure that the November election is certified on time by making it clear to any potentially defiant officials that they're not allowed to refuse to certify, and that they could face charges or penalties if they do. The ACLU suit follows a Detroit News report that Robert Froman, a 73-year-old Republican canvasser in Kalamazoo County, said that he would not certify the 2024 presidential election if it went the same way as the 2020 election, which he believed was stolen from former President Donald Trump. Trump lost Michigan by about 150,000 votes to Joe Biden. The ACLU, representing two Kalamazoo County residents, is asking the court to declare that Froman is legally required to certify the election. State law already requires canvassers to certify elections within 14 days or face potential misdemeanor charges for willful neglect of duty and huge potential costs. Froman told VoteBeat on Wednesday that he would certify the election and said his words were taken out of context. The Detroit News, and a letter included in the ACLU's filing, stood by its reporting. I think this whole thing is kind of ridiculous, Froman told VoteBeat, arguing that it made no sense to him to sue him over something he hasn't done. Going on, it's not unusual to sue over something that has not happened, although plaintiffs don't often ask a judge for something as straightforward as declaring that someone must follow a law. Cases where a person or board is actually taken to court over certification are relatively rare, although officials and outside groups do threaten legal action. Lawsuits over mere threats of refusal to certify appear to be rarer still, and Froman's case could be the first of its kind. It makes sense in this case for the ACLU to file the suit preemptively, and in general for officials and advocates around the country to zero in on the legal obligations of canvassers, said Quinn Yeargain, a professor of law at Michigan State University. Election officials acting proactively across the country now can help minimize problems after the election, Yeargain said. The goal is to keep people from trying to act outside of the prescribed duty of their job to protect the sanctity of elections. It's an unfortunately necessary course of action that has been taken to respond to truly unnecessarily highly egregious conduct across the U.S., Yeargain said, referring to the string of certification battles since the 2020 election. Before 2020, certifying an election was generally uneventful and took place behind the scenes after an election. But in Michigan and other states that year, Trump and his allies roiled the certification process by promoting unsubstantiated claims of voting irregularities and fraud. In Wayne County, the state's most populous, two Republicans fought certification and were allegedly pressured by Trump himself to not certify. At the state level, a Republican refused to certify, putting Michigan's certification in limbo until the other Republican canvasser voted to approve it, saying the board had a duty to certify based on these returns. The effort to reinforce the duty to certify is a logical, rational response based on what we've seen so far, seeking to prospectively guard against the future erosion of democratic norms, Yergain said. Michigan laws make it clearer that many states that canvassers must certify elections based on vote totals presented to them. They are not allowed to investigate the election or question its legitimacy based on outside factors. If county canvassers don't certify an election, they're required to turn the results over to the Board of State Canvassers, who are then required to certify the election. And in that case, the county that didn't certify would have to pay for the state level canvass, a cost that could be passed on to the individual canvassers. A constitutional amendment adopted by the 2022 passage of Proposal 2 clarifies that only election officials, not canvassers, can audit elections. Proposal 2, which included a series of election reforms and was approved by nearly 60% of the vote, also requires canvassers to verify elections based only on compiled vote totals. Officials saw an example of what a failure to certify could look like in May, when Delta County canvassers initially refused to certify a recall election after advocates called for a forensic audit despite no evidence of irregularities. After pressure from the state, canvassers did eventually certify the election. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson and Attorney General Dana Nessel used the incident as an opportunity to make clear that failing to certify would be a violation of a canvasser's duties and involve civil and criminal charges as well as fees. Other states are invoking similar laws to resolve or head off certification fights. In Arizona, a court forced a county board to certify its election results after it failed to do so by the state deadline in November 2022 under a similar statute. Two of those board members were then indicted for initially refusing to certify. In Georgia, the state Democratic Party and the National Party have sued to prevent the state election board from implementing new rules they say could prevent certification come November. Specifically, Democrats cite two new rules in their lawsuit as violations of the state's requirement to certify. One that requires election officials to certify after conducting a reasonable inquiry without defining what that might be, and another that appears to give county election boards the ability to investigate election if vote totals are off. The rules were approved with support from state election board members who Trump later praised by name at a rally. In Michigan, the lawsuit against Froman seeks to have a judge declare that canvassers must abide by their constitutional duties and cannot unlawfully foist his obligations onto members of the board of state canvassers. A refusal to certify would violate Kalamazoo County residents' right to vote, the suit says. Phil Mayer, senior attorney for the ACLU of Michigan, said that the major goal of the suit was to prevent the politicization of the canvasser's job, which he referred to as the simple ministerial duty of grade school math, adding vote tallies together and confirming that the stated winner has the highest total. Refusing to certify comes with an immense financial cost that is unfair to taxpayers, he said, and sows doubt in the election that can have long term consequences. Mr. Froman may have said the quiet part out loud if his reported comments are true, but there's a very good reason to believe that there are other canvassers who feel the same way but aren't saying the quiet part out loud, Mayer said. This lawsuit ought to be a message to them that they too will be held accountable if they refuse to do their duty. Nathaniel Priscilli, a Stanford law professor who specializes in election law, said it wasn't clear if the suit would achieve its stated goal of getting a judge to remind Froman of the requirements of being a canvasser. But legal success isn't the only thing on the line, he said. They want to put officials in Michigan and elsewhere on notice that there will be legal consequences for officials who fail to perform their duties required by law, Priscilli said. Again, if you want to read that for yourself, that's from Bridge, Michigan. Article's headline, Michigan Canvasser Suit Part of Growing Effort to Preempt Election Deniers. That was published on September 5th, written by Haley Harding. We're going to take another quick break. We've got some more Kalamazoo-based stories coming up in just a second. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WITR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find us online at Media Cyphers on YouTube or Media Cyphers Kalamazoo on most podcasting apps. Keep it dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution. Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. I'm your host, Andy Argo. Next story we're going to talk about is really disappointing news from about the pod project that's been kicked around here in the city of Kalamazoo for a number of years now. If you don't know what that's about, it's basically this idea that we're going to find so I'm going to kind of cite a little bit article from WWMT, give you just some of the facts. But Housing Resources Incorporated, which is a local nonprofit that helps with housing issues. Um, they have been trying to find a place in the community where they could put these pods, these 50 housing pods. And Basically, what they are these 8 by 8 foot tiny shelters slash houses, come equipped with a mattress, electricity, heating, air conditioning. Um, and the idea was that you were going to have an all-inclusive site where people's mental health, healthcare needs would be met. Um, it would basically be a way of holistically addressing the housing crisis in Kalamazoo and actually really helping the homeless population. And it would have also included like a dining facility, bathrooms, etc. Now, originally the site was going to be over on Alcott, and then it moved around. I think the final location they settled on was to place them at a Clark Logic property along Lake Street near Schuster Avenue and by Juliana's Restaurants. And they also had looked at Stockbridge, but and according to the article, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, it was met with pushback from locals due to safety concerns. A study had found that the Lake Street location was the best spot because it had adequate space, existing utilities, buildings that can be renovated and used for client services, and access to public transportation. However, according to this article, Housing Resources Incorporated said they continue to hit financial barriers. Even though we had a site chosen, that site had to be developed. We need bathrooms, dining facilities, laundry. Homelessness continues to grow in the city, and not moving forward with the project was a tough pill for Davis to swallow. In Kalamazoo County, there are currently 378 single adults who are homeless and seeking assistance, along with 213 families, according to HRI. People are staying on the streets in the cold, laying in the dirt, sleeping, and this was a solution for a small part of them, but a solution nonetheless. And according to HRI, uh, the 2 year plan will not move forward, but it quote unquote notched important successes. It helped drive the extension of the city of Kalamazoo's emergency housing ordinance, prompted awareness and discussion of the need for sustainable housing, and spurred talks on how to work across communities and sectors for lasting solutions. So there's a lot that hasn't been discussed. And this article doesn't really dive into why exactly is this project being canceled? Why isn't it getting enough funding? According to this article, the city of Kalamazoo had committed $1.2 million as the county continues exploring possible locations. And Kalamazoo County and the city of Kalamazoo recently unveiled shared efforts to create a shelter for unhoused individuals and families, according to HRI, which, by the way, that's been a demand for years and years. Going back to when I ran for city commission in 2019, this is one of the things that I had on my platform. And basically, everybody who was currently on the commission at the time, and a lot of the other people running said, well, it's not really the city's job to come up with these, or they gesture broadly towards the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission. Um, so there's a lot going on with this, and it's we've commented on the story before. Um, this is really disappointing, and it's disappointing in a very tactile, visceral way. Several hundred people, several hundred families that might have been looking at this as an imminent solution to their housing crisis, and is now well, now it is scattered to the winds. And I think it's a huge failure as a city, that we aren't able to coalesce around this solution for our neighbors. And part of what has played into this, I talked about is that nascent NIMBYism. They kept looking for a different site, different sites to put this not in my backyard, NIMBY. That was the response at many of the other sites when they that were proposed, and it's a failure. Not only because again, I guess the philanthropists didn't want to fund that. Oh, looky there. It's like, oh, they didn't want to fund something that would materially benefit houseless people and help their quality of life. They'd be more. They're really far more interested in gentrifying downtown, building a big unnecessary events center. But yes, you have that side of it where they weren't able to find the philanthropic funding for this pod, which goes back to my earlier point about why we just need to tax the rich instead of depending on their charity, because they can pick and choose what projects they give money to, making sure the homeless are housed. Well, that's just what I guess that doesn't represent their bottom line or their interests quite as well as other projects do. But there's some blame to go around on this. I think it is also an immense failure of working class solidarity in this city. Not only in the NIMBYism that we saw when they tried to put it over on Stockbridge or some other locations. There's also that pushback where they try to, pick the Lake Street location. There's a lot of assumptions about what the homeless population is. Oh, they're criminals or they're mentally ill, and it's like again, we all deal with those issues, and those issues are represented in the house population. That is true, but particularly with a site like this that is offering built-in supports, mental health services, again, drug support stuff. People again do not resort to crime when their basic needs are being met and their economic needs are being met. People don't just go commit crime for fun, despite what I don't know, maybe your conservative uncle might tell you. So it's also a way to reduce crime. It's a way to reduce poverty. And, you know, rich people will do what you want if you put enough pressure on them. And there was not sufficient pressure from Kalamazoo's working class to get this done, to get this across the finish line. So I think we bear a little bit of responsibility here. We need to talk to our neighbors and have exercise empathy. And I think a lot of this is about how, again, we're living capital in the 21st century. We all live these atomized existences. We are disconnected from one another. A lot of the connection that we do get is by talking to each other while alone, sitting on our computers or our phones. That sense of community that I think of back in like the 30s and 40s, people would stop evictions. They would make sure, that their neighbors' needs were met. It's something that is genuinely been lost, and I don't like to do a lot of that navel gazing that the boomers do. Oh, everything was better back then. It's like no, there's some meanness in the world. It's like we know it. In a lot of ways, our culture is better these days than it used to be, but we are lacking in this very specific area where we need to take that energy that we have and make sure that our neighbors are being taken care of. And I am talking about the houseless. They are our neighbors. Um, and the failure of this pod project, I feel, is a failure of solidarity. And we all need to do better going into the future. Um, because again, projects like these, they are kind of band-aids. We need a housing for all solution. There are more empty houses in Kalamazoo than there are houseless people. That's a pretty obvious solution if capitalism wasn't getting in the way. But projects like this, they're a good thing, and it is a very disappointing piece of news that I have to give you to tell you that it is not going forward. Now, we'll keep our eye on, what this solution from the city and county is, and we will give you updates as they come out. Maybe we'll find out a little bit more in the future about why the pod project didn't move forward. But in any case, if you want to read a little bit more about it, there is an article on WWMT that I cited some quotes from. HRI ends Kalamazoo's temporary housing pod project as community explores other solutions. That was published on September 5th. We're going to take another quick little break. We got come back. We've actually got a story from The Guardian talking about um, a Detroit judge who kind of said a few quiet parts out loud. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find us on YouTube and our Media Cyphers Kalamazoo podcast. You can find podcast streaming on most podcasting apps. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for the music, not the music, your source for political revolution. Sorry, I'm going to start from the top there. Sorry, radio folks, I forgot to hit the record button. So this is an article. This is a quick hit from the Associated Press. Michigan judge loses docket after she's recorded insulting gays and black people. It was published on September 6th. A suburban Detroit judge is no longer handling cases after a court official turned over recordings of her making anti-gay insults and referring to black people as lazy. Oakland County probate judge Kathleen Ryan was removed from her docket on August 27th for unspecified misconduct. Now the court's administrator has stepped forward to say he blew the whistle on her, secretly recording their phone calls. I just want to make it right. I want to keep my job and do it in peace, Edward Hutton told WXYZ TV. And I want the people in Oakland County that come to court to get a fair shake, to have their day in court, and to have an unbiased trier of fact. The judge didn't talk to the TV station, but her attorneys, Gerald Gleason and Thomas Cranmer, said, we look forward to vindicating Judge Ryan in the appropriate forum. Probate judges in Michigan handle wills and estates, guardianships, and cases that involve the state's mental health laws. In the phone recordings, Ryan uses an anti gay slur against David Coulter, the county's highest elected official who is gay. She also referred to blacks in the U.S. as lazy. I'm not systemically racist. I'm a new racist, said Ryan, who was first elected in 2010. But what is a new racist? I gotta wonder. Is this like some new alt right? I'm behind on the times. It's like some goofy new alt right term I haven't heard about. I'm a new racist. It's the cool racism, racism with lime. I don't know. Anyway, it is legal to record phone calls in Michigan if one party consents. In this matter, it was Hutton who said Ryan had called him at work and after hours for years. Hutton said he sent the recordings in August to Coulter, Elizabeth Clement, the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, and other officials. Chief Probate Judge Linda Hallmark then suspended her with pay while she's investigated by a judiciary watchdog, the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission. Anyway, I'll link to that. I'm referencing an Associated Press story. And at 1 o'clock, we're going to be interviewing a candidate for U of M Regents who had some issues at the Michigan Democratic Party convention. Before that, though, I did want to touch on one national story you may have heard about from your probably your conservative uncle. This actually, I heard about this for the first time. I'm not gonna call people out, but I've got like a more conservative coworker at my job who we just you shoot the breeze while you're on shift and talk about stuff. Oh, this country's going down the drain, and of course, as a Marxist, I can certainly agree with that. But then he referenced something going on in Aurora, Colorado. Venezuelan gangs are taking over an apartment complex, they said. All right, already right there, my BS detector was kind of going off. And I'm like, really? Are you sure? And I didn't know anything about this story, but I'm like, I got to dig into this. And the more, there is layers to an onion, this story, folks. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it. So this blew up all over conservative media. And, it just really ticks all the boxes of what our show's about. We talk about mainstream media propaganda, class consciousness, all that other stuff, solidarity. And so let me summarize what actually happened. And it is very interesting from both like a class and a media analysis perspective. Because what happened is this, and I'm going to be citing a couple things from this article from the Sentinel, which is a Colorado-based publication. Truth or consequences? Police residents say Venezuelan gang allegation is a dangerous fabrication. And the quote of the century, basically what the actual residents of this apartment complex are alleging, who are mostly Venezuelan migrants. And this is the quote of the century here: "We're afraid of your mayor and of the cockroaches and rats in our apartments, not of gangs." They're basically saying the gang, quote unquote, gang problem was fabricated by the slumlord who owns that complex. He was violating several city statutes, and building was not up to code. So he basically took this out of context clip that the residents alleging are not even of Venezuelans, people going into an apartment with like AR-15s, and passed it up to some people in the local conservative media ecosystem that got fed up to Fox News and Newsmax. That got everywhere onto conservative YouTube. So that to the point where, random coworker in Michigan is getting it on his, their news feed, and I'm talking about it with them at work. Um, but as it turns out, this was basically fabricated by a slumlord to draw attention from the fact that he was mismanaging the property that he owned and was basically letting his residents live in filth. Like literally, this apartment complex stopped picking up the landlord, the slumlord, stopped picking up the garbage at this apartment complex. He can get away with this for several reasons, and part of it is up until this made national news, a lot of these migrants were in a position where they really didn't feel like they could safely complain. Again, a lot of them were either undocumented, they had fear of retaliation. The slumlord was reported, charging them exorbitant fees for like, building upkeep and that sort of thing. And this isn't just me as like, a working class leftist saying this. There are even people on the city council who usually, are part. Uh, I'm just going to read this quote from the article because it really just shows what kind of BS this is. Two fellow Aurora City Council members on Tuesday criticized Kaufman and Jurinsky, who were kind of helped spread this story around. Both Republicans who've taken outspoken stances against immigrants for scaring the tenants and for triggering a flood of social media racism against Venezuelans. We're dealing with irresponsible folks who, for political reasons, want to make a frenzy about immigration in a city that has historically been welcoming of our immigrant population, said Coombs, a progressive Democrat and longtime advocate for Aurora's immigrant population. The supermajority Republican to Democrat partisan split on the nonpartisan 11-member city council is a regular occurrence. Unfortunately, we have parties who are unwilling to engage in good faith and in rational discourse. Councilmember Crystal Murillo also expressed concerns about her colleagues seemingly willfully spreading untruths. We're getting distracted by unconfirmed false narratives that play on people's fears. If people are spreading false information, there should be consequences. There are real impacts in the community when we use people's identities as political pawns. So I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but I really want to I thread the needle there about how, again, this exploded on conservative media to the point that even like liberal media had to touch on it. There's a lot of anti-immigrant bias even in liberal media that kind of took this story at face value when it turns out this story was literally made up by a slumlord in order to get out of doing legally necessary building upkeep and to continue. It's kind of backfired because in a sense, these residents are now feeling emboldened to speak out and talk about what's actually going on in a way maybe they hadn't before. So that kind of bites them back in the butt. But yeah, again, very interesting story with a lot of different angles to touch on. I do want to recommend people check out Hassan, Hassan Abi YouTube channel. He's a pretty famous left tuber. He did a really great interview with a former Aurora city councilman about what is actually going on there. Have Venezuelan gangs taken over apartments in Aurora, Colorado? We will link to that in the show notes. We're going to take another quick little break. When we come back, we will be interviewing a candidate for U of M Regent about some recent shenanigans at the Michigan Democratic Party convention. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your source for political revolution.